Hello everybody, I'm back with more Necromancer feedback, this time on the Inarius set, which is a really cool freaking set. This is build 45499, this is the old Saint set. Now, everything I'm about to say, you kind of have to realize that it is very hard to evaluate this set because it is so flexible. You can use any skill, any rune, you can use any item that can affect those skills and runes, because the only necessary skill to use this set is bone armor. Unlike, you know, the, let's say the blood set, the Tragul set, you have to use like blood spenders, right? So that kind of limits what you're doing. I mean, there's plenty of skills that do that, so you have a lot of options, but this is literally bone armor is the only thing you need. Everything else is free game, which is crazy. So I'm not going to go over the set bonuses, but I am going to clarify something that they did change since the last time I talked about this set. Bone armor used to be when you hit enemies with it, it would then give you a stack based on how many enemies you hit. So say it goes up to 10. So say you hit 9 enemies, it would give you 9 of those stacks. But if you cast it again on 2 enemies, it would only put it back at 2. So it would take away your stacks and give you 2. They've changed that because this set previously used to augment that. So it would just stack instead of actually, you know, giving you whatever amount based on how many enemies you hit. So this now just gives you it straight on the base bone armor. So if you hit 5 enemies and then you hit another 2 enemies with bone armor, you will be at 7 as opposed to going from 5 down to 2, which is nice. I kind of liked that that was on the set before because it means that the damage reduction on the set had some flavor, but it means that bone armor also is really hard to use outside of this set. Saying that now, this set just means that the damage reduction on it means that if you hit an enemy with bone armor, you're gaining an additional 2% damage reduction per enemy hit, which it stacks up to 10 times without any, you know, changes to anything, without any items, which means that by default on the 4 set, you're getting 50% damage reduction. So that's really the only main change between the last time we talked about the set and now, except the fact that we have all of the items that augment all of the abilities, which means that this set can get crazy if you can come up with something cool. Now, my idea for my build in the background that I'm running is I wanted to do kind of a melee mancer. I tried using Death Nova, and I tried using the Death Nova item, which is increases Death Nova's damage by 20% per enemy hit, which is a cool idea. The problem is it just is not consistent enough, and it definitely does not do enough damage on a Rift Guardian. So with that in mind, there's 2 other weapons in the game right now that are way better than it. And that's a known quantity, so it's really hard to use that. It's kind of the same issue with Bone Spear. The Bone Spear weapon is cool and good, but because there are 2 way better items for weapons, then you just don't use the Bone Spear weapon for the Pestilence set. So when those other items get buffed, or when the good items get nerfed, I hope it's the other way around. I hope they bring everything up to the level of the other items, which then would create more options. In that case, I think that, you know, you'll see people using a Death Nova build for this. Personally, I've decided to go with Skeletal Mage. So you'll see that I'm using a very specific Skeletal Mage rune, which I really, really like. It's called Singularity. It consumes all of your essence as opposed to just spending 40, which is the base cost on Skeletal Mage. So it consumes all of the essence to summon the 1 minion, and that minion's damage is increased by 3% for every point of essence you consume. And I'm also using the passive that gives me 40 additional essence, and I could, if I wanted to, put points into max essence with my Paragon points. And what that would essentially do is mean that when I cast that Skeletal Mage at full essence, it's going to be crazy good. Plus the fact that I'm using the ring that summons 2 at a time, which of course means that I am getting 2 mages that have that crazy buff on them, and it's absurd. It's awesome to use. The way I'm generating my essence is I'm using Grim Scythe. This kind of comes in where I wanted to try a melee mancer. And with Grim Scythe, it's per enemy hit you gain essence, so when you have a huge stack of enemies, you can pretty much go straight to full essence with each attack. which is really nice. Like in high greater rifts, I could see this being very, very powerful, but because I don't have the damage reduction now, I can't really get up there with high greater rifts and get a ton of enemies stacked on top of each other and just be summoning these crazy mages, which do a ton of damage. The weapon that I'm using, instead of using Death's Scythe, which is what you kind of are defaulting to at the moment on the beta, which increases the damage of your poison skills based on how many poison skills you use, I'm using Tragul's Corroded Fang, which is the Cursed Scythe rune for Grim Scythe, which is what I'm using, which the rune is enemies hit by the scythe have a 15% chance to be inflicted with a random curse. This item gives me a 100% chance to apply the curse. So I'm running around, I'm generating essence by hitting a ton of enemies, and I'm cursing them with a random curse. And then I'm having this huge pool of essence that I'm throwing down on these mages, and the mages are doing all of my damage, right? Even though I kind of wanted to try a generator build, it didn't quite work because the damage of the generators just don't do enough damage, even with all of the like generator augmenting like abilities, or rather the items for it. There's even an item that is Grim Scythe deals an additional like 8%. I think it goes up to 10% damage it does for each point of essence it restores. It's still, like, I was using that with this build in the background, but it's still not that great. If that percentage was bigger, then it would be a way more viable build, except if you're hitting a Rift Guardian, which you're only hitting one Rift Guardian, it wouldn't be very good. But that said, I did try the generator build, didn't quite work out. So what I did do is I went to Skeletal Mage. Now I'm using this rune. The other abilities I'm using, Blood Rush, just to kind of get to and from. Bone Armor, obviously. I'm using the Stun with the Bone Armor because it's very, very good. And then I'm using Land of the Dead, so I can throw that down and generate a ton of essence, which means I can cast a ton of the mages and get them up to 10 when I'm attacking like a Rift Guardian or a pack of mobs and stuff like that. It's really fun. It's a fun build. It just, it doesn't have the damage reduction to get into higher greater rifts at the moment. If I had the damage reduction, then maybe that would work. I tried using the passive that gives me the 1% damage bonus for each enemy afflicted with one of my curses, which if I was in a higher greater rift, that could be a pretty significant damage reduction boost. I am using Rigor Mortis, which is blight abilities, which are poison abilities. Now slow enemies and reduce their attack speed by 15% for 5 seconds, which is pretty good. That helps keep me alive a bit, but it's not quite enough. I would use Standalone, which is the armor passive, but I have mages out, so they're kind of reducing that, so there's no reason to use that. Swift Harvesting is really nice to get your Grim Scythe to do a faster attack, so you're gaining more essence, so I'm using that. And of course I'm using Extended Servitude, which increases the duration of Skeletal Mage and Revive by 25%. So I'm having these mages out for longer. They're doing a ton of freaking damage because I'm casting these huge abilities. It's really good. It's just unfortunate that I don't have the damage reduction. And I'm trying to use Wisdom of Kalan, which increases the maximum stacks of bone armor by 5. If this increases the maximum stacks of bone armor by 20 or by 10, anything but 5, anything above 10 actually would be fantastic. The reason I say that is because with Wisdom of Kalan, increasing the maximum stack of bone armor by 5, it essentially gives you 25% additional damage reduction, which for an item, a piece of jewelry, even though it's a neck, I'm not having it on my person because I'm using Compass Rose and Traveler's Pledge. But if you have it in your cube, it's not as good as just having a straight unity, which I could have in my cube. I'm just not using because I'm just for the flavor, I want to put Wisdom of Kalan on there. And that's unfortunate because, you know, a unity is a 50% damage reduction, whereas Wisdom of Kalan is only a 25% additional damage reduction. So, and you have to rely on actually having stacks. So if you die, you're kind of losing that damage reduction from the neck piece. It's unfortunate. Now, if I had that on my person plus a unity, in the cube or on my person, then we're kind of looking at a little bit better. But the issue I'm running into is that I already have a 50% damage reduction coming from the Compass Rose and Traveler's Pledge while I'm moving around, which is pretty often when I need to. And then I also have the flexibility of just standing still and gaining 100% additional damage with those two items. So I kind of wish this neck piece was 10 plus stacks additional of bone armor, and I think that would really help that damage reduction for this set. And I think that my build has a lot of damage on it, a lot of damage potential with these mages, but because of these other items, I've tried also using the poison rune for skeletal mage, which it makes them just kind of channel and do all this crazy. It's a little overpowered because the standard mages attack a single target, where these poison mages attack multiple targets, and they do essentially the same damage, but to all targets around, and they attack really fast. So they're very, very good, and the rune is either too good or the other runes are not good enough. And I think I'm leaning more on the other runes are not good enough quite yet. But by using that, by using the Death's Scythe, which increases my poison damage, you see the new build in the background, it can do quite a bit of damage. I just don't like using things that I know are a bit broken to a degree. Like, I know I'm only doing a greater of 65, but that's not the point. It's all relative based on what all of the other Necromancer abilities or builds can do, right? So if all of the other Necromancer builds are also doing 65, or rather, or can do like consistently 60 without just getting raffle stomped because of our lack of damage reduction at the moment, then if this one's doing 65, it's a bit more powerful, which I don't necessarily like to see. I think if I had more damage reduction, I could probably do an 80 pretty easily with the damage that this thing can do. But the damage reduction is a bit of an issue. So without that, you know, you can't really get up there. And I know that there's builds doing Greater Rift 100, but it's that broken pet set build that is essentially taking advantage of the fact that you can have 100% immunity. So, like, you got to look at all things on the Necromancer in a relative light. Sure, this is only doing a 65 with the damage reduction issues, but you know, if everything across the board is doing a 65 and then they just increase the damage on all abilities or increase the damage reduction or just like balance everything out, then all the sets will go back up to kind of roughly what everybody else is doing. I mean, that's the point of the beta. So don't take this at face value that the Necromancer is only going to be able to do a Greater Rift 65 when it comes out. That's not the point. You know, the Necromancer is going to change, and it seems that people are easy to forget that. But with the poison build in the background, I'm essentially running the same build. It just has that poison mage instead, and I'm not using Tragul's weapon, so I'm not using the curses, but I am still using the same Grim Scythe rune, so there is a chance for the curses. It's just not 100% chance. It's a fun little idea, right, using Grim Scythe, and I wish that I got to use Grim Scythe more. Here's my feedback portion of this, right? Like, you got kind of the feeling that I have, which is a pretty good portion of feedback, don't get me wrong, but now here's some suggestions based on how I feel when I use Grim Scythe. I want to look back at Heroes of the Storm. If you play Zool in Heroes of the Storm, you use this W ability, which is essentially Grim Scythe. It feels really cool. It's got a cool sound effect to it. I mean, Grim Scythe by default in the game has a cool sound effect, and all the runes are really fun. It feels, though, that Grim Scythe as an ability feels too small. It doesn't feel like it feels kind of wimpy when you throw it out. Like, at first you're like, oh, this is cool, and then you see all of the other runes for all the other abilities, and you're like, I mean, with the exception of Bone Spear, you're like, wow, this is doing a huge effect on the screen. You know, you look at like Blood Nova or Poison Nova, and they're like these huge abilities, and it's awesome. Then you look at Grim Scythe in light of those, and you're like, it just feels a little tiny. If it was like 20% bigger, or if an item increased the size of Grim Scythe, I feel like it would not only enable a better generator build, because then it would give some sort of additional like damage based on that phylactery that increases the damage per essence points generated, then it also just kind of makes the ability a bit better than it is, because the other generators for most of the other builds, unless you're running a Melee Master, are really good, and I don't see myself often going towards Grim Scythe as the like main generator for a build, because it means that you have to get up close and personal, and the risk of getting up close does not outweigh the reward of getting that additional generation. and the damage isn't that good on it. So if it was a bit bigger, I think it would start kind of weighing it more in the favor of being worth it to use for most builds. I do like it though, and I think that Grim Scythe is a cool ability. I think it just needs a bit more buffs. But with the build in the background, it works really well. It works really well with the curse item. I didn't think that item was very good, but being able to just apply random curses to people 100% of the time, every time you hit them, is awesome. I like that a lot because the curses are really good, and for the most part, it means that item is very good. I thought that item was going to be more geared towards trying to come up with a support Necromancer, but what I've discovered is that it can just be really powerful if you have a lot of enemies on screen, especially if you're running the passive with the 1% damage reduction per enemy cursed, and then you make all your curses last forever, and then you just run around and, you know, curse everything. It can kind of get out of hand, but it is really cool and a really good item that I think I underrated when I first saw it. But again, as I said at the beginning, it's hard to evaluate the Necromancer with this set, because if anything gets changed, it changes this set. If Bone Armor gets buffed, it changes this set. If any other ability gets changed, it changes this set. You add a new item, it changes this set. So it's hard to be like, yes, this set is good, or yes, this set is bad. What I feel about this set is that the damage from that Bone Storm thing around you is not relevant. It doesn't seem like it does any damage, because I actually forgot that it was there. I want to be honest, I forgot that it was there until after I was like reviewing the footage. So that tells you a lot about how much damage it's actually affecting or doing. It kind of feels like a Sweeping Wind almost, right? Like, for the most part, you don't ever notice the damage of Sweeping Wind. You're noticing the effect of Sweeping Wind, but this has no effect. It's just a straight damage swirl around you. And I kind of want it to also be affected by your pickup radius, because then you're kind of coming up with cool options available with using Devour and using maybe Aura of Frailty, where it kind of increases that damage radius, or that pickup radius, and then you use like an Avarice Band. Like, it would get really cool with that, but outside of that, it doesn't feel like it does anything. Like, I forgot that it was even there. I just assumed that it was showing me that I had Bone Armor on, essentially. But with that, the 850% increased damage on Necromancer abilities, it also feels a little underwhelming. I know that it is buffing me, and I know that it's doing damage. It just doesn't feel like quite enough yet. But I am doing a lot of damage with this build, so it kind of feels like maybe it is doing a lot. I'm just not necessarily noticing when I don't have it on, and I think that that could also be the case. But increasing that number doesn't make any sense if you increase the number on any abilities or any items, right? So, like, I think just leaving the set as is at the moment, maybe increasing the damage reduction on that Bone Armor 4 set, maybe instead of additional 2% damage reduction, it's like an additional 5% damage reduction or something like that. Or maybe you do just increase that neck piece, instead of being maximum stacks Bone Armor by 5, it's maybe 10 or 20, because then you're getting a huge damage reduction buff, and now you can get in the middle of things, have that Bone Armor swirling tornado be actually affecting things, instead of you having to kind of skirt around the outside of a fight, and then you can use Grim Scythe and like really get in there. And I think that would be a cool idea for this build. But other than that, like I said, I like the set. I like that I am very flexible with the set, and that this build that I have in the background with the poison thing is cool, but I like the other one where I'm like dropping these huge skeletal mages that are just wrecking face. I like that a lot more than this one, but it's unfortunate that I feel like I'm being shoehorned into using that poison weapon. So we'll kind of see what it's like on that next beta build where they change it. Either way, you should be excited about this set because it is good. It is really good. We just need everything else to be as good as this set, and then we'll have some really cool builds. With that being said, though, we shall see you guys next time.